background on myself. I've been in the staffing industry for about 18 years now, exclusively within the IT staffing space. So I've run a branch, I ran a region, so about 9 branches, and then I've also run national sales for a variety of different IT staffing firms, both local, regional, as well as national. In addition to that, I do have some experience selling project-based IT solutions, and then also selling a little bit of software. And so within all of that, I put the first disclaimer out there to let everybody know, I can assure you I've made every possible mistake you can make in selling staffing services. So let you guys all be aware of that. Now the good news is I'd like to think that I'm in a good position to teach and to be able to share some lessons learned, and I think some of those lessons learned will come out over the course of this afternoon. About 5 years ago, I launched my company, Menemcha Group, where we do sales training and consulting specific to the staffing industry, really more specific to the IT space or the IT staffing industry. So that's a little background about myself. So let's talk about why you all decided to carve an hour out of your precious time today and talk about why you're really here. So today's agenda. What is strategic selling? And that's the first sort of question we're going to explore as a group here in just a second. Strategic selling has really become, almost synonymous to the term Kleenex. It's become sort of cliche. And so I want to talk a little bit as a group about what strategic selling is and what it means to everyone. We're going to talk about the concept of selling up the value chain, or more specifically, selling up the customer value chain and what that means. And then we're also going to spend a fair amount of time today really exploring and talking about today's customer. I can tell you one of the sort of aha moments in my career was when I eventually got promoted to becoming a manager. And as a manager, I had to start recruiting and hiring my own staff. And it was a great lesson learned because it began to give me such a greater appreciation for what it's like to be a customer, and what it's like to be a customer being on the receiving end of a sales call and having to go through the hiring process of either hiring a consultant or a temporary employee or a full-time employee for that matter. So we're going to talk a little bit about why customers buy. We're also going to talk about how customers buy. Again, one of the things I've learned over the years, and I've been real fortunate, I've had the opportunity of working with some amazing salespeople who I've learned a lot from. And one of the things I've learned over the years, though, is the more that you can, or the better that you can understand your customer and how they think and why it is they do the things they do, selling becomes infinitely easier. So we're going to take a look at that. And then most importantly, we're going to talk about how to actually structure a quote-unquote strategic sales conversation. So I'm going to literally walk you through exactly how you're going to structure it and literally what we're going to say and the questions that we're going to ask. So hopefully one of the outcomes for today is you're going to have a nice blueprint or a roadmap to walk away with for having a really nice dialogue, what I like to refer to as generating meaningful business dialogue with your customer. And then hopefully at the end we're going to have time for some Q&A. So I want to put a quick question out there to the group, or David, maybe you can, I'm not sure if I can do this to the entire group or if you need to do it, but my question for everyone is, if you can reply back to the chat, is I'm just curious to get everyone's thoughts on what is strategic selling? When you hear the term strategic selling, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Curious to hear what some people's thoughts are. So I'll give everybody a chance to reply. We'll take a look at a few of them, and then we'll move ahead.
All right, and Dan, I'll give you the response they come in. Number one, know your client, selling with a strategy in mind, being focused on client needs, having a plan, selling with a motive for the long-term relationship, being targeted, selling to the right clients, having an organized sales call, selling beyond the initial job order, positioning yourself. And I'm going to stop there because there's just tons more great responses coming in, but you can jump from there.
Yeah. No, that is awesome. There's 5 more webinars right off the first 5 responses with so that's great, folks. One One of them really resonated with me. David went through them so quick, but one of them said something to the effect of selling with the long-term relationship in mind. I'm going to try to make a mental note of that and circle back to that at some point in the presentation today, because I think we all would say that we want a long-term, long-lasting relationship with our customers. We want to be quote-unquote partners with our customers. But one of the things I see in this business is there's a lot of behavior that's indicative of transactional selling. So we'll try to sort of work that in as we move forward. But for the purpose of our discussion today and selling professional staffing services, I really define strategic selling as it's where you're selling to multiple decision makers. So in other words, where multiple decision makers are involved, where the prospect organization has many different options or suppliers they can buy from, and the buying organization's decision-making process is complex. And so strategic selling, and really kind of what I hope to lay out for all of you today, is a methodology that can provide sales professionals with a roadmap for how to transition from simply pitching your service offering and uncovering what I call predefined budget-approved job orders to generating meaningful business dialogue. And what I mean by that is when we talk about meaningful business dialogue and generating that conversation, specifically laying out a methodology that's going to help you guys uncover and diagnose your customers' critical business issues, number one, and then number two, actually co-creating a vision for the solution that the client's trying to achieve. So that's kind of, as my role as facilitator today, my goal and hope is to be able to lay out a framework for you guys that you can all use as you move forward to be able to have that conversation on how you can go about uncovering and diagnosing the customer's challenges, uncovering what their goals are, and then together through salesmanship, which we're going to explore, co-create a solution with the customer. All right. So let me try to explain this insanely busy slide that I've put together here. Selling up the value chain, or really selling up the customer value chain. So let's focus on the middle of this slide first. So see here where it says current state and future state and so forth. So if we look at this middle piece, kind of going top to bottom here, this is what your customers, and by customers, I'm talking, I'm not talking individual contributors or team leads or project managers. I'm talking director level, VP, executive level folks, the folks that I think you all want to sell to. This is really sort of their decision-making process. So what happens in corporate America is every company or every customer, they have what I refer to as a current state and a desired future state. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And what they also think about is they think about the challenges that face them today. So do we have a challenge? What are our challenges? And is there a gap that we need, that needs to be addressed? And if there is a gap that needs to be addressed that's preventing us from going from our current state to our future state, do we need to buy something, external help to help us get there? So this is the thought process. Literally, executives are sitting around a round table, and these are the things they're thinking about and they're discussing. So these are their sort of high level. Notice how over to the left it says strategic, course of action, and tactical. So over here we have, this is sort of their strategic thinking and what they're talking about and thinking about. Once the decisions come out of there, they now decide what course of action they need to take. So they start thinking, gee, how should we solve this problem? What action should we take? And then once they get the answer to those questions, they get down to some of the more tactical questions. Who should we buy from? How should we go about solving this, etc. Now, if we go further to the left on the slide, it says customer perceived value high and customer perceived value low. And what the point that I want to illustrate here is as salespeople, we can be a part of the conversation up here, the strategic conversation. You're going to be perceived as delivering and bringing much greater value to the conversation and to the customer. So if we go over here to the funnel, and we got my cheesy little sales guy down here at the bottom, in my experience, most salespeople selling staffing services are down here at the bottom of the funnel. And what I mean by that is the customer is already having these conversations, and they've decided on their course of action. And so the salesperson from the typical staffing company is just coming into the opportunity after all that's already been done. And so this is part of the reason, folks, why, the staffing industry, we as professionals talk about how we're getting commoditized. Well, there's a lot of reasons why we're getting commoditized. Don't have time to go into all that today. But one of the reasons why we're getting commoditized is we need to figure out how we can get up here and take part in this conversation and start helping the client, consulting with the client to help them solve their problems and achieve their goals. So, and that's hopefully, again, what I'm going to lay out for you for the remainder of this presentation. So, one last thought. Simply identifying a client need, that's pretty easy. But helping our customers think about and vividly imagine what their world would be like if we can help them go from their current state to their desired future state is how we as salespeople can go from order taker or order fulfillment and doing transactional sales to being a value-add service provider and eventually, ultimately, quote-unquote, that trusted advisor status. So that's what we're really talking about here. And if you think about it, most, again, I can only speak to my experience, but most of the reps I've come across and working with over the years, and I've worked with over 200 different IT staffing firms around the country now. And of course, I worked for a couple myself. Most are just making a whole bunch of telemarketing calls, seeking out predefined budget-approved job orders. And so I would share with you that there's really not a lot of salesmanship involved in that. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about today's customer. So I'm going to put out another quick poll question, or David, if you could help me with that, and that is, why is it so dang hard to get in front of corporate decision makers today? And David, you can sort of maybe paraphrase that question. So the question is, why is it so difficult to get in front of today's customers?
So everyone would just use the question response and let me know what you think, and let Dan know what you think. First and foremost, great answer. They don't see the value in the service being extended. They've been burnt in the past. They're taking sales calls from all angles. They don't have any time. There's tons of competition. They're not seeing value in our services. Everyone's stretched too thin. Because most salespeople approach them in a used car salesman type of smile and dial way. I love that.
This is great. The more you guys respond, the more ideas you generate for me for different, and David for that matter, different ideas of webinars we could continue to host to generate other conversations and ideas for all of you. So this is great. David mentioned twice, customers don't see value in the service. So I'm going to go a little off topic for just a quick second here. Let's make one thing really clear. Your customers don't see value, and this may sound really harsh and tough, and I don't mean it to be that way. It's just reality. Customers see zero value in the services that we as a staffing company provide. They could care less about our screening process and our recruiting process, our methodology, our candidate database, all that stuff. What they care about are the bottom line business results they get from using your service. So it's the outcome that they get from using your service. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more down the road. So I heard that a couple times, and so I wanted to make sure I at least mentioned that. But here's what's going on with today's customer. Here's why it's so insanely difficult to get in front of today's customer. I think we've reached the perfect storm. And what I mean by that is, if you go back over the last few years, we've been through a couple of wars. We had a massive recession. We had major layoffs. As a result, managers, mid-level managers anyway, they have more work to do than ever, more responsibility than ever. They didn't get pay increases. They probably took pay cuts in most cases. They all have way more direct reports than what they can really handle. Unrealistic deadlines, unrealistic deliverables, very little bit of budget to deal with. Now, in the last, 18 to 24 months, I guess, and it depends on where in the country you sit and what type of professional staffing service line you're selling, the IT market the IT staffing space has bounced back really well over the last year and a half or so, a couple of years. And what's happened is the pendulum's actually swung the other way. So there's actually been companies going public, mergers and acquisitions. And so what that means is when companies go public, when companies merge and acquire other companies, that represents change. And as a general sort of rule, folks, people don't respond well to change. It pushes them out of their comfort zone. Imagine you come into your office tomorrow and your owner says, yeah, we've just merged with XYZ company, and all of a sudden you got 20 new salespeople and recruiters working in your office with you, and you have a whole new set of policies and procedures. It totally changes, you know, your daily behavior. And so all these things are going on in the marketplace with the customers that you're calling on. Now, there's a couple more kickers to throw in there. Most of the people you're calling on are in middle management. People in middle management, for the most part, are probably somewhere in the 40s to early, maybe mid-50s. And so that means they're raising children. And their children, they can have children from little ones to kids in college. And what does that mean? Well, that means from time to time they've got issues to deal with at home. So you've got all the challenges at work. You've got family issues. And, oh, gee, I almost forgot. They're getting inundated with sales calls, as some of you pointed out in your response to David. They're getting inundated with sales calls, not just from other staffing companies, but from other companies selling all kinds of other products and services. So if you call a customer and your message is focused on touting your company and talking about your service offerings or your accolades, they're going to instantly tune you out. Decision makers absolutely despise being pitched. You know, and by the way, here's the other thing, and David and his team can probably educate you far greater on this topic than I can, but customers no longer need you to tell them what they do. They can get all of the information they need about you and your company online. They go and look at your LinkedIn profile, Facebook, Twitter, of course your website. So there's a lot of buyer behavior is really changing because of all the information that's available on the web. So customers really want to engage people in a much different way today than they did just a few years ago. So, you know, for us salespeople, it's about creating meaningful dialogue and creating conversations. So the question becomes, how do we actually do this? This is quite a roadmap. This is quite the conundrum that we have. So, again, another real quick poll question for everyone. Given that, you know, that picture that I've just painted, this perfect storm of what we're up against, what do you think we should be talking to our customers about? Or maybe the better question is, what do you think your customers would want to talk to you about? So let's give that a second and see what some of the responses are.
Their company, their problems, and again, we're looking for why would customers want to talk to you? So what we're seeing is relevant candidate skill sets to drive their business objectives, solving their problems. I'm seeing a theme here, Dan. What can I do to make your work life easier? How can we be more of a resource to them? Specific industry expertise you can share.
That's fantastic. So obviously everybody seems to get that. So, and those responses are all spot on. So at the end of the day, when you're reaching out to a customer, particularly the higher you go up in the food chain or on the org chart, the customer is assessing. They have a decision to make. Is Dan Fisher worth speaking to or not? And so, again, given what we know about clients and how they feel about salespeople and what they're experiencing, we need to be focusing and speaking with our clients about what would make it worth their time. And so as we look at this slide here, yes, we need absolutely to focus on what their goals are. What have we learned or what can we uncover about what their strategy is? You look at the little bottle figure down there. We want to try to identify some of the bottlenecks in their business. The best salespeople, by the way, not only can they study a company and identify bottlenecks in a prospect's business, but they can start to see potential solutions on how to free up those bottlenecks. And then, of course, they take those ideas to the customer. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we kind of work throughout here. How do we figure this out? How do we figure out, you know, what the client's challenges are and what their goals and objectives are? Well, there's so much information available to us today. You can read their annual reports. You know, I've got CIO Magazine and Gartner listed on here. That's for the folks that are selling IT services. Gartner is a big, very well-known research company like a Forrester Research. You can go out and get benchmarking studies on different industries. Companies nowadays, you're on a webinar today. Everybody's doing webinars to talk about their products and services. Well, maybe if we listen to one of our prospects' webinars, that can give us more insight as to what they're trying to do, what their strategy is, and so forth. And then we can take that information and use that as part of our sales pitch. So I literally could go on for 20 more minutes talking about all the other ways that we could become a quote-unquote client SME or subject matter expert. But here's what we want to focus on. The first thing is we want to focus on how to pique their interest, or piquing their interest really by offering a value proposition. Now, we don't have time today to go into what a value proposition is and all the details of that. I cover that in some other classes, actually. But your value proposition, you want to have a value proposition that actually includes metrics or statistics that quantifies how you're impacting your customer's business. So, for example, in the IT world, yeah, we've got a team of Java developers over there working with Google Micromart building an application. Well, what the service that we're providing and how we're impacting them has nothing to do with, it's not about how much time we saved or how few resumes we sent. It's about what can the client do as a result of the work my Java developers are doing. Well, they're building an e-commerce site, and as a result, we're going to increase revenue and release a new software product or what have you. So that's what I'm referring to with a value prop, and you want to be able to use metrics or statistics. So that's how you're going to quickly cut through all the clutter and differentiate yourself and get your client or your prospect to really pay attention to you by having an impactful value proposition. The next thing that you can do, the next thing that you can do is, the next thing to really impress your prospects, rather, is to share with them what you know about them. So you want to really knock your socks off your prospects. Tell them what it is you know about them, what it is you know about their growth, where they're investing, what you think their strategy is, etc. So that's another way. Remember, they don't care about your products or service offerings. What they care about is how much does this salesperson know about me and my business. Think about it. The less time they have to spend educating you on who they are and what they do, the greater your odds are of moving forward with having a further conversation or getting a meeting with them. Another way that you can go about demonstrating that you're worth speaking to, share with your prospects the challenges and business issues that their competitors are trying to overcome. And you can share the challenges that they're trying to overcome relevant to your service offerings. So obviously you sort of bend it towards what you've been doing. Now, to give you an example, let's pretend for a second that you have a customer in the healthcare space. And this is for, this will be relevant to the folks selling IT staffing. I can try to give another example for engineering or scientific, but I think you guys will understand my point. So let's pretend that you have a customer in the healthcare space. And you've been working with this customer in the healthcare space to help them integrate data across disparate systems. Well, wouldn't it make sense when you're calling on other healthcare companies to share with those companies what your healthcare customer, what their challenges are and how you went about solving them? Your prospects are going to be really interested in that. And by the way, as a general rule, so healthcare companies, I can assure you that if you're calling into hospitals, for example, or retail companies for that, it doesn't matter what industry it is, companies in those industries are all struggling with the same types of challenges. So these challenges are all universal. So the point, though, being your customers are definitely interested in hearing what you have to share with them about not only the challenges that their competitors are up against, but also you sharing with them what some of the trends are, what some of the solutions are, best practices are to solving those problems. So the way, now you might be thinking, well, gee, I'm not an expert. I'm not a practitioner. I don't know what the solutions are. Well, if you go out and you read Gartner and CIO or whatever the relevant publications are for your industry, you'll start to educate yourself. Talk to your candidates or your employees, your consultants. They're the ones that have expertise in those areas. They'll be able to tell you what's going on in that space. So there's a number of different things that we can do, and ultimately your goal is you want your customers to feel that you have a depth of knowledge pertaining to their business. You want your customer to feel that you have an understanding of their business goals and challenges. And lastly, you want your customers to feel that you actually have information or insight or ideas to share with your customers on how they can either overcome their challenges or achieve their goals. So you're talking about positioning yourself as a go-to, somebody who has value-add information. So, but if you go into your calls, if you keep going into your calls looking for predefined budget-approved job orders saying, hey, I'm just checking in, do you have any needs? Or referencing a job posting on Indeed or what have you, they're going to tune you out. They're going to throw you in the commodity bucket. So as I mentioned, I've trained a lot of folks over the years, and most people that I work with, most salespeople, you know, this concept's not real difficult. Most people understand it. The biggest challenge is breaking the habit, breaking this habit, these old habits of just checking in and applying this sort of new strategy or methodology and making it part of our day-to-day behavior. That's really where the challenge comes. All right, real quickly, why do customers buy? Well, one of the things I've learned over the years is people buy for two reasons. Consumers, all of us are consumers. On a weekend we go out to Best Buy or we go shopping at a local mall or what have you, and we buy clothes or a TV or whatever it may be. We tend to buy because it makes us feel good, and we get sort of emotional enlightenment out of that. Now, the other reason why we buy, and the second reason why we buy, which is the only reason why corporate America buys products and services from a third party, is to move away from a problem. And more specifically, there needs to be a compelling event. And so a compelling event, and I'm guessing many of you have probably heard the term compelling event before, but maybe some of you haven't. So compelling event, or we can say quote-unquote pain points, what we're referring to is, or how I define a compelling event is, a compelling event is a direct response to moving away from a business pressure or problem that has economic value associated with taking no action or doing nothing to resolve the problem. And so the action to resolve the compelling event, the expectation is it's going to deliver a significant business result that is quantifiable, greater than not taking any action. And so it's going to be quantifiable in the standpoint of either the company is going to save money, there's going to be an increase of revenue, profitability, etc. So here's the one thing I can promise all of you. You all get job orders every day. You might not all know what the compelling event is that's driving those job orders, but I promise you, there's some sort of compelling event going on within your client organization that's driving the need for them to justify picking up the phone, carving out the resources and the money to hire that engineer or that scientist or whatever it may be. And compelling events, by the way, they're time-bound, hence my little clock here, and they're tied to money, hence my little calculator. So that's why customers buy. That's ultimately what drives customers to buy. Now, here's where we start to get into quote-unquote strategic selling, I guess you could say, strategery, in the words of our funny humorist, Mr. Will Ferrell. So, you know, there's been a ton of research over the last 20 or so years on how business decisions are made. I'm a sales geek. I love sales. I read a lot of books and do a lot of research. And so there's been a lot of research actually that's been done over the years on how corporate America makes business decisions. And the reason why it gets so much attention and why sales is such a challenge is because oftentimes there are dozens of little choices and little decisions that your customers have to make that ultimately add up to making the big decision, i.e. that we need to hire a contractor or a consultant, or that we need to outsource a piece of business to an engineering firm or what have you. And so there's often a lot of moving parts and variables that influence decision makers. And so the larger the financial investment, the bigger the impact. And by the way, the more decision makers that come into play, the more variables come into play. And that's what starts to make it so complex, hence the need for a more strategic sales approach. So let me try to give you a real quick example. So let's pretend that there's an IT manager over at, whatever, I don't know, at Walmart, large Fortune 500 company. And this IT manager says, you know what, we need to hire an Oracle developer to run and operate and administer our database. And so now also in the mix, when this IT manager decides they want to hire this person, they also have a, they're also implementing Salesforce.com. And they're also trying to build out a marketing database or a data warehouse, for example. And they also have a data center move going on. Now, don't worry about, if you're not in the IT space, you don't need to worry about what those terms mean. The point is, there's other projects going on. And so this consultant or consulting firm that the client is looking to hire is going to be directly impacted by these other projects taking place. And so because they're going to be involved in interface interface with these different groups and be involved in these different projects, the quality of the hire is going to have an impact. And more specifically, that impact, because they're going to interface with other groups, other stakeholders are going to want to interview the consultant. They're going to have their opinion and point of view on the consultant and which consultant they think they should hire. And so, of course, anytime you have multiple people with multiple opinions, multiple people with different opinions, they also bring different agendas to the table and a different set of values. And so that is what makes it so challenging for the salesperson. Now, further complicating matters is the fact that having to make an outside purchase for a service or product is actually not a fun process for decision makers. It's timely, and it can be seen as a real big hassle. So here's the four things. Here's what your customers are thinking about in terms of when they're thinking about whether or not they have to buy something or how they go about buying a service. So the first question is, do we even need to buy something today? So as I mentioned, customers often buy things because they simply want them, not because they need them. So consumers, on the other hand, we buy things because we want them, not because we need, well, we buy them because we need them too, but we often buy them because it's a want, not a need. Corporate America doesn't buy things out of need. They buy it because, or out of want. They buy it because they need them. The second question is, what should we buy? So there's always multiple ways in which a company can go about solving a problem or achieving a goal. And so after they determine that they must buy something, they have to determine what they're going to buy. Now in our case, we sell professional staffing services. And so I think what most of our customers have to think over is, well, gee, I could go with a full-time employee. I could go with a temp or a contractor. I could hire an actual consulting firm, like a bench-based system integrator or a staffing firm. I could go with a professional services organization. So, maybe a software company or hardware product company. They have their own staffing wing. They could go with them. Or, and our biggest competitor, by the way, they could also try to figure out how they could shuffle internal resources around and not have to buy anything at all and just try to migrate somebody internally into that role or position. So think about that for a second. Each one of those courses to buy can involve many different people and many different departments within your prospect organization. And so in my experience, oftentimes managers are still not sure what course they're taking, even though they've actually engaged a staffing firm to hire a contractor. And I think you guys see that every day. They give you a job rec, you may even submit a candidate, and then days or even weeks go by before you hear from them again. Well, a lot of times that's because they got you engaged. There's no skin off their back for you to do all the work and find a candidate, but they're actually still trying to figure out how they want to go about solving this problem. So again, back to that, that second slide. If we can get in early on and have the conversation at that strategic level about the problems they're trying to solve, the goals they're trying to achieve, in all likelihood, the amount of times that scenario happens that I just described, where the client goes MIA, that's going to significantly reduce. Now, the third decision they have to make is, who should we buy from? So before a buyer can buy anything, they must have the resources or the ability to get the resources to buy it. And they also have to make sure they have resources in terms of time and manpower to use whatever it is they're buying. So think about it. When your client or your consultant hires a consultant or a temporary employee, they have to make sure that they have resources available to work with that temporary employee or consultant. You can't just bring them in and say, yep, go ahead and get started. There's a coordinated effort involved. Somebody needs to sit with that consultant, get them up to speed on systems, processes, documentation, going over the project, the work they're going to do. That all takes time and planning on behalf of the client, and they need to think that out. And that, of course, the decisions that come out of that can impact multiple people and multiple departments, again, depending on the scope of the work they want the temporary employee to do. And then, of course, the last decision, who should we buy from? So if a company knows they need to buy something today and what they need to buy, and they have the resources to buy it, they still need a source to buy it from. And so all four of these decisions are all interrelated. In other words, one can't happen without the other. All four must happen before a customer is actually ready to buy. And so in a perfect world, these four decisions, I think would probably happen in four little separate departments, where one decision doesn't happen until the one before it was already made. The problem is it doesn't work that way. And so we as salespeople, we get a job order, so we naturally think we're at one point in the sales cycle. Oh, job order, that means present candidates, get interviews to go off, deals closed. Well, the client could still not have made one of these decisions internally, and so as a result, they're much further behind in the process than what we really realize. And so that's, again, part of what makes it so incredibly challenging. So let's now talk for a second about what it is that your customers, and more specifically, directors, VPs, executives, are thinking about, and how we can start to tailor a message and a conversation to them. So remember, we're trying to engage in what I call meaningful business dialogue with our prospects and customers. Our goal, what we're trying to do, is we don't want to make a sales pitch. So every customer that you're calling on has what I call a current state, and they have a desired future state. So their current state, what I'm referring to there is, that is what they're working towards. What are the goals and objectives that they're working towards today? So they either have a goal or an initiative that they're trying to accomplish, or a problem or issue that they're trying to move away from. So if you look at the middle of this slide here where it says, is there a gap and how significant is it, this is the key to the whole thing, and this is really sort of the key to sales and, whatever, quote unquote, consultative selling, strategic selling, whatever buzzword you want to throw on it. It's the key to the whole thing, and what I'm getting at is, we as salespeople, we're simply trying to determine if a gap exists between the client's current state and their desired future state. And so the way that you figure that out is by asking some really well thought out, open-ended, and thought-provoking sales questions or probing questions. Now, before we start doing that, or as we start doing that, though, we first start off by uncovering what their current situation is. And there's a couple of basic questions here on the slide. And by the way, I'm going to share with you some questions from sort of this point forward in the presentation, some probing questions you guys can ask your customers. You're going to get a copy of the slide deck. I think the questions are all in the notes. However, if you want another copy, you'll get my email address at the end, and I can shoot that out to you. But what we're looking for here with regards to the current situation is, so we're looking for, does the customer have a problem or a pain point that they're looking to solve? In other words, are they looking to migrate away from their current state and get to their future state? So notice the questions we're asking here. Are you happy with your current situation, or how happy are you with your current situation? How How content are you with your current situation? Mr. Customer, what issues do you recognize, or what issues do you have that need to be addressed today? Would be an open-ended probing question. And so notice that these questions we're asking here, they're not about job orders and upcoming hiring needs. What we want to do is we want to focus on problems, issues, and pain points that the customer is struggling with. Now, whether they need to hire a consultant to solve these issues at this point is really irrelevant. We just want to uncover a problem or a pain point. Now, here's an interesting side note for you. IBM, so for those of you that don't know, IBM is known and notorious for having like the world's best sales force and amazing leadership program in terms of what they do there. And they've done hundreds, if not thousands, of studies over the years. One study that they did, sales-oriented study that they did years ago that I read about, was a study that basically said 93, and this is pretty crazy actually, they did a study that said 93% of all prospects are not currently in the market for whatever it is you're selling. So I'm not talking about just staffing, I'm talking anything. So imagine we get in a conference room and I'm selling car tires, or I'm selling, I don't know, beer mugs or coasters, whatever it is. Based on their study, they're saying statistics are going to show that out of those 100 people, only 7 people are going to be actively in the market for what I'm looking to sell, what I'm trying to sell. So think about that when you're prospecting, and if you find yourself, you know, hey, I'm checking in, do you have any needs? That means you have a 93% chance or greater of hearing no. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure. We're kind of, you know, pigeonholing ourselves back into a corner. However, here's what I can promise you. I promise you, all of your customers, they have issues. They wouldn't be employed if they didn't have issues to solve. Doesn't necessarily mean they have budget and the resources to bring in consultants or temporary employees to solve those issues, but I promise you they have issues. So our goal here is to uncover what their problems are. And then what we want to do is turn that problem into an actual sales opportunity. So let me share with you how we do that. So here's how we structure the call. Here's how we sort of get into the dialogue. So the first thing is I call up a customer, hey, Dan Fisher calling from the Memphis Group or ABC Staffing Company, and I use my value prop, which I referenced earlier. You know, we've been working with other healthcare companies. We've been able to help them reduce their costs by X% by doing X, Y, and Z. That grabs their attention. And then to demonstrate credibility, I share with them what I know about them. So, Mr. Customer, I've been doing some research on you. I understand that you guys are about a $1 billion company, and you're really looking to invest in X, Y, Z area. And one of the challenges that you face is X, Y, and Z. And again, we talked a little bit already about how you can figure out sort of what their strategy is and so forth. So I've got a nice value prop. I'm not talking about my company, my service offerings. I demonstrate some research or demonstrate credibility by referencing my research. And then I ask some thought-out, some open-ended and thought-provoking, probing questions. And then the last thing is, what we all know to do as salespeople, we sit back and listen. So let's take a look at how this call or conversation might unfold. So I went out and I did some research on a company called Cisco, not the router and switching and router company, but Cisco, the company that provides like food products to schools and restaurants and so forth. I'm sure you've all probably seen one of their trucks at some point, SYSCO. In any event, that's not really relevant. I went out and I looked at their 10K statement. And a 10K statement, by the way, is something that's associated with publicly traded companies, and it's a great way to get some information on a company. And what I found in the 10K statement is I found a couple of really interesting tidbits. So I work for an IT staffing company, and here's the things that jumped out at me. The company, first of all, I found out the company is growing through mergers and acquisitions, hence this first bullet point here. The second bullet point says a shortage of qualified labor could impact our earnings. So, wow, in order to keep their stock price up, they need to have really good qualified labor on staff. Well, gee, I'm in the labor business. That's what we do. We provide qualified labor. And then it says technology dependence could impact their business, and it goes on to say with the last bullet point, it says basically, to paraphrase, it says that our ability to decrease cost and increase profits depends on the reliability of our technology network. Well, I'm salivating. If I'm an IT staffing sales professional calling on this account, I'm salivating. So now the question is, how do we use this information to have a really, to generate some meaningful business dialogue with an executive? Well, here's your roadmap, folks. So building off of not just the last slide, but the slide before it, notice my value proposition. We recently helped company A and B with their systems integration project to integrate their newly acquired businesses. By the way, I'm hoping I can reference a customer within the same industry as Cisco. So in this case, that'd be within the food and beverage industry. And then what I do is I take those bullet points from that 10K statement and I kind of turn it into my credibility builder. So hey, Mr. VP, I was doing some research. I read in your 10K statement that key to your growth strategy is integrating these companies that you're going out and acquiring. So there's my credibility builder. Oh, gee, Dan Fisher, actually, this salesperson actually did take a minute to research our business. And then I say, so Jim, let me ask you, when you acquire a company, what are the top challenges you face from a technology integration standpoint? And now I sit back and I listen. And so now, of course, the customer could come back and say, well, Dan, that's a good question. We've already got it all figured out. If that happens, I reload. I go back and I take one of those other bullet points from the 10K statement, and I come back and I ask another open-ended question. It's kind of like I'm throwing spaghetti against the wall and I'm waiting to see what's going to stick. I'm looking to find that pain point, that opening to have a conversation. Here's where we get into quote-unquote the selling. And what you're going to notice here, folks, is, again, I'm 47 minutes, 48 minutes, 49 minutes into this presentation. We haven't talked once about how we're going to talk about your service offerings in your company yet, have we? Well, just to set your expectations for the last 10 minutes, that's not going to change. So the best salespeople, not only do they ask the most questions, but they ask the best questions. So we now want to dive into some dialogue with the customer. We want to ask them, gee, Mr. Customer, why has that been such a challenge for you? Why has integrating these companies been such a challenge? What's driving this? Who and what are the business drivers behind this? So I'm asking some questions to further understand and diagnose sort of the compelling event or what's driving the issue to make it so difficult for them. Why is achieving this goal so important for you, Mr. Customer, to get these businesses integrated smoothly and timely? Now, the answer might seem obvious, but you still need to ask it and hear the exact words come out of the customer's mouth. Then I want to quantify or qualify the customer's motive and sense of urgency. Mr. Customer, are you and the team committed to solving this problem? Again, how many times have you guys, for any experienced reps on the phone, you've had clients give you job recs. They tell you they got to hire this person ASAP, and then a week later the thing gets canceled. Happens all the time. So we want to quantify, or qualify rather, the motive and sense of urgency. Qualifying the ROI. Well, gee, how much money could you save if you could shorten the amount of time it takes to integrate these two companies? Now, here's the thing that's going on. Let me stop for just a second. While we're asking all these questions and qualifying and really understanding the customer's problems and why it's so important to solve them, yes, part of the benefit of all those questions is we're gathering intelligence and we're learning a lot about our customer. But here's the other thing. You want to really set yourself apart from your competitors. Asking these questions, not only is it a different conversation than what your competitors are having, but asking these questions and having this dialogue is going to make your customer feel understood. I don't know about you, but when I get on the phone with a customer service rep and I'm upset over my cell phone bill or my cable company, if I get a customer service rep that demonstrates that they understand my issue and my concern and make me feel understood, I feel a lot better about that company and about the service. So doing this is going to help you make your customer feel understood. When a customer feels understood by a salesperson, they're going to have confidence in you. And when customers put confidence in you, they start to trust you and ultimately give you the business. So I'm not going to go through all the questions here, but then we would get into qualifying budget. You know, who else besides yourself would be responsible for funding this? How will you justify an investment like this? Et cetera, et cetera. The client risk piece, by the way, you know, is really important to uncover, you know. So, gee, Mr. Customer, what do you see as some of the risks involved in a project like this? What are some of the risks that you see, Mr. Customer, in bringing a consultant in or a temporary employee in to solve this problem? What sort of challenges might that present for you and your team? Okay, and then the last piece, so we you know, by the way, so that conversation that I've mapped out, this is probably not a one-time, this is not like a one-time 15-minute call over the phone. And it's probably not a one-time conversation face-to-face. It's probably going to happen over the course of discussions. So just to set and sort of manage everyone's expectations. And so we get towards the end here, you know, we have, you know, the pieces to the puzzle, if you will. In other words, we're trying to figure out, are we a fit? Can we help the customer reach their goals, solve their problems? So, you know, we summarize the conversation. You know, so I'd summarize the challenges the client has shared with you that they're experiencing and how it's impacting their business. And not only that, who else in their business it's impacting. Maybe it's impacting their customers or their suppliers. I summarize the goals they're trying to achieve and why achieving those goals are so important to the clients. And then, of course, we summarize, you know, if we talk a little bit about how we're going to go about resolving the issue or solving the problem, we talk a little bit about that, and we talk about, of course, establishing a next step. Now, keep in mind in this conversation, again, it may take multiple conversations before you come up with a solution. And clients, by the way, they don't expect you to have a solution. After they dump a whole bunch of data on you about their problems and their goals, they don't expect you to come up with a solution. They realize it may take weeks, it may take months. So don't feel like you have to have the solution. I think a lot of salespeople tend to put too much pressure on themselves. In some cases, I see salespeople talking themselves out of even trying to have this conversation altogether because they're so nervous about what they're going to say their solution is. And that's just, you know, that's the procrastinator in the back of your head talking you out of that. So don't let that happen to you. So establish the next step. Mr. Customer, may I offer a suggestion? Mr. Customer, what do you see as the next step? And so you're trying to ask your customer, again, if you think there may be a fit to do some work together or to continue the conversation on how you guys might be able to work together. Last slide, something to keep in mind, guys, the winning vendor. Again, I've been doing this a long time. What I've learned is the winning vendor, the vendor that wins is usually the vendor that best understands the client's desired state and also offers the simplest and least risky plan of going from current state to desired future state. And I don't know how many of you on the phone today get involved in going after MSP business and VMS and responding to bids, RFPs, and writing proposals, but critically, you know, everything I talked about today ties 100% into that in going after and trying to win those projects. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. So, David, I'm going to turn it back over to you, see if we have any questions, and if we do, hopefully I have some reasonably intelligent answers.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. Great information. And everybody, just use the question dialog box if there's any additional questions you'd like Dan to answer. Dan, we did have a couple of questions along the way about specifically dealing with the VMS buyer and how does strategic selling tie into that environment. So any other, you just briefly mentioned that the process fits, but could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm honestly probably not the best resource when selling into, well, I guess I'm not 100% certain of the exact question, but if you're getting asked, I'm going to infer it this way, that if you're getting invited to complete an RFP or an RFI or to compete on an online auction for a VMS or an MSP account, and I do have some experience doing that when I sold national accounts. The quote-unquote strategic approach to winning those deals is you need to do what, either you need to get there first. So here's what happens. When you get those RFPs and you say, oh, wow, hey, Microsoft sent us an RFP to be part of the bid. Gee, I've made a couple calls in there, and I'm kind of surprised that we got included. Well, the reason why you got included is some other sales rep from another vendor did what I just explained to you over the last 45 minutes. In other words, they got there first, and they had this whole conversation with the client to understand their desire, their current state and their future state. And so they've actually, in some cases, they've written the RFP, but they've created the ultimate end solution with the client. And so when you get that blind RFP, or that they ask you to bid on the for a proposal or what have you, you're just column fodder. In other words, they got to go tell the powers that be that, yeah, we put it out to bid to 10 vendors, even though they already know they're going with vendor number one, who created the sales opportunity in the first place. And then my other thought with that is 99% of the time when those bids come out, there's usually one point of contact, a gatekeeper, who basically says, do not try to talk to anybody in the company or you'll be disqualified. Well, I've learned that you have to pick up the phone and call executives and have this conversation with them. Otherwise, you have no shot. So you got to be willing to take some risk.
Excellent, thank you. A couple other questions. Someone is a fellow sales geek. I've taken Miller Hyman's strategic selling course, but it was many moons ago. Do you think that there are any other aspects of the Miller Hyman selling process that are directly applicable to IT or engineering staff?
So I've had small little tidbits of Miller Hyman over the years, and me too. It was a long time ago. I guess I'll say this. So I've been through just about all the major sales training programs, and they're all fantastic, and they have brilliant salespeople, but most of those methodologies are designed for selling major big-ticket items. I'm talking like $10 million, $50 million projects or products. So a lot of it's not necessarily specific to what we sell. However, if you are selling, projects where you're a master staffing provider, then I think their methodology probably is applicable. I would suspect that I think they have what's called LAMP, their large account management process or something. That's probably relevant.
Okay, good stuff. And I've one more before we wrap up, Dan. So often in staffing, you want to be talking to the actual department manager, the CIO, the engineering manager, and you're being relegated to the HR department, who may have little or no understanding of the end state. How do you strategically sell when HR is trying to pigeonhole you, or the organization is trying to pigeonhole you into only talking to HR? Yeah, so great question. What I've learned is it's all in your approach. So you've got to think of it this way. The Accentures and the IBMs, or the big quote-unquote fancy consulting firms with the MBAs, they're not getting relegated to HR. They're not getting relegated to some gatekeeper. And the reason is, well, there's probably a few reasons, but one of the big reasons is because they're calling up and they're talking about specific business issues that they can solve. And so hoping one of the takeaways for you today was for me to share with you, by having these conversations about solving their problems, if you apply this approach, I think you'll find that you'll get the amount of times that you get referred to or relegated down to HR will be significantly less. Here's another little thing I learned, and this may sound crazy. You guys may think I'm off my rocker. But if you call up a company and you introduce yourself to whoever picks up the phone, and you introduce yourself and you say, yeah, I'm with ABC Staffing Company, and you use a bunch of staffing-related buzzwords in describing your service and what you do, they're naturally going to refer you to HR because staffing is a function of HR. So you need to change your mindset and really concentrate on and think about the problems that your consultants or temporary employees solve for your customer, and change the conversation to talking about that rather than talking about staffing needs. Excellent. All right, Dan. Well, thank you very much again for all of your great insights. Really appreciate all of the words of wisdom and the process and some of the specific examples that you shared. I know a couple people had already asked about getting some more information on and some of the sample questions you shared, so I asked them to directly follow up with you after today's call. If you wouldn't mind just clicking to our final slide.
Yep.
Our next Lunch with Haley is 4 weeks from today, and we are going to be talking a little bit about planning for 2014. So we've titled the presentation ACA Talent Shortages and Planning for Next Year. The focus is really going to be lots of sales and marketing advice. It was interesting in putting together the outline for this webinar, went around our organization and we asked everybody what they would recommend for next year, and I thought I was going to have to put together a lot of content for our webinar. It turns out our staff put together some amazing content. I got 5 or 6 pages of ideas that we will bring to you in 4 weeks. So again, thank you to everyone for attending today's Lunch with Haley webinar. Dan, thank you once again for presenting great information. If you have questions, download the slides, contact Dan. He'll be happy to help you more with strategic selling. And from all of us at Haley Marketing Group, we look forward to seeing you on next month's Lunch with Haley.
Thank you again, David.